Among the many unexamined facts endlessly repeated throughout the media are that 1. Half of all marriages end in divorce, and 2. The traditional family with both parents raising their children is now the exception rather than the rule. Both facts are wrong and reflect an ignorance of statistics, compounded by a gullible acceptance of those beliefs which are consonant with the vision of the Anointed. Marriage patterns. Washington Post writer Haynes Johnson, Texas Governor Ann Richards, and feminist writer Barbara Ehrenreich are just some of the many to repeat the claim that half of all marriages end in divorce. In a given year, the number of divorces may well be half as large as the number of marriages that year, but this is comparing apples and oranges. The marriages being counted are only those marriages taking place within the given year, while the divorces that year are from marriages that took place over a period of decades. To say that half of all marriages end in divorce, based on such statistics, would be like saying that half the population died last year, if deaths were half as large as births. Just as most people were neither born nor died last year, so most marriages did not begin or end last year. Yet, on the basis of such gross misconceptions of statistics, the Anointed not only assume airs of superiority, but claim the right to shape public policy. According to census data for 1992, 11% of all adults who had ever been married were currently in the status of divorced persons. If 50% overstates the divorce rate, 11% does not include people who had been divorced but were now remarried, or those who were never married. However, these census statistics are relevant to the claim that traditional marriages are disappearing, for remarriages are still marriages. Married couples outnumbered unmarried couples by about 54 million to 3 million. Most of the people who had never married were under the age of 25. Marriage statistics, which count everyone over the age of 15, of course include many people whom no one would expect to be married. But by the time people reach middle age, the great majority have been married. In the 45 to 50-year-old bracket, for example, people who were married and currently living with their spouse outnumbered the never married by more than 15 to 1. That is not even counting those people who had been married but were now separated, widowed, or divorced. Traditional marriages have become an anachronism only in the vision of the Anointed. People are getting married later, about 5 years later as compared to 1890, but they are still getting married. Within these general patterns, there are substantial differences between racial groups which should not be ignored. However, what should also not be ignored is how relatively recent these racial differences are. In every decennial census from 1920 through 1960 inclusive, at least 60% of all black males from age 15 on up were currently married. Moreover, the difference between black and white males in this respect was never as great as 5 percentage points during this entire era. Yet by 1980, less than half of all black males in these age brackets were currently married, and the gap between black and white males was 17 percentage points. By 1992, that gap had widened to 21 percentage points. Like other negative social trends, in crime, welfare dependency, venereal disease, and educational test scores, for example, this trend represented a reversal of a previous positive trend. From the census of 1890 through the census of 1950, there was an increase in the proportion of both men and women currently married, among both blacks and whites. Ozzie and Harriet families. A member of the Institute for Human Development at the University of California at Berkeley voiced a widespread view among the intelligentsia when she said, "After 3 decades of social upheaval, the outlines of a new family are beginning to emerge. It's more diverse, more fragile, more fluid than in the past." This was taken as representing the passing of the Ozzie and Harriet family. While the proportion of children living with both parents has been declining over the decades, still the 1992 statistics from a census survey showed that more than 2/3, 71% in fact, of all people under the age of 18 were still living with both their parents. Fewer than 1% were living with people who were not relatives. In particular segments of the population, especially in urban ghettos, the situation was drastically different. Nationwide, a majority, 54%, of all black children were living only with their mothers in 1992. However, this was not a legacy of slavery, as sometimes claimed. As recently as 1970, a majority of black children were still living with both parents. The sharp decline in marriage rates among black males in recent decades has obviously taken its toll on black children being raised without a father. If most American children are still living with both parents, how can the traditional or Ozzie and Harriet family be said to be passing? Like so many statistical misconceptions, this one depends on confusing an instantaneous picture with an ongoing process. Because human beings go through a life cycle, the most traditional families, indeed Ozzie and Harriet themselves, would be counted statistically as not being a traditional family. Before Ozzie met Harriet, and even after they married, they would not be counted in the Census Bureau's married couple family with own children under 18 category until, in fact, they had their first child. In later years, after the children were grown and gone, they would again no longer be in that statistical category. Moreover, in old age, when one spouse dies first, the other would obviously no longer be counted as a married couple. What this means is that innumerable people who have had the most traditional pattern of marriage and child-rearing would at various times in their lives be counted in statistics as not in the category popularly known as the traditional family of parents and their children. Depending on their lifespan and the span of their childbearing years, some individuals in the most traditional families would be counted as not being in such families for most of their adult lives. Because most 16-year-olds have not yet married, because married couples do not continue to have children living with them all their lives, and because every elderly widow or widower does not remarry, does not mean that the traditional family has been repudiated, except perhaps by some of the anointed. The family is inherently an obstacle to schemes for central control of social processes. Therefore, the anointed necessarily find themselves repeatedly on a collision course with the family. It is not a matter of any subjective animus on their part against families. The anointed may in fact be willing to shower government largesse upon families, as they do on other social entities. But the preservation of the family as an autonomous decision-making unit is incompatible with the third-party decision-making that is at the heart of the vision of the anointed. This is not a peculiarity of our times or of American society. Friedrich Engels' first draft of the Communist Manifesto included a deliberate undermining of family bonds as part of the Marxian political agenda, though Marx himself was politically astute enough to leave that out of the final version. Nor has this war against the autonomy of the family been confined to extremists. The modern Swedish welfare state has made it illegal for parents to spank their own children, and in the United States, a variety of so-called children's advocates have urged a variety of government interventions in the raising of children, going beyond cases of neglect or abuse, which are already illegal. In New Zealand, a whole campaign of scare advertisements during the 1980s promoted the claim that 1 out of 8 fathers sexually abused their own daughters, when in fact, research showed that not even 1 out of 100 did so. As in so many other areas, the ascendancy of the vision of the family which now prevails among the anointed began in the 1960s. A 1966 article in the Journal of Social Issues epitomized the rationalistic view that the family was just one of a number of alternative lifestyles and an arbitrary social preference which defined illegitimacy as a social problem. The societal preference for procreation only within marriage, or some form of socially recognized and regulated relationship between the sexes, is reinforced by laws and customs which legitimize coition as well as births and denote some responsibility for the rearing of children. It is within this context that value judgments may be regarded as the initial and formal causes of social problems. Without the value judgments which initially affected and now continue to support the legitimation of coition and births, illicit parenthood would not be regarded as a problem. In fact, by definition, it would not exist. Thus, the disproportionate publicity and public concern about teenage unwed mothers is simply a matter of how people choose to look at things. As in the case of early discussions of rising crime rates, it was suggested that more inclusive and improved counting of non-white illicit births may have caused a statistical change without a real change. In short, everything depended on how we chose to look at things, rather than on an intractable reality. Teenage pregnancy was only a socially defined problem in this view, while the more generic problem of unwanted pregnancy was what needed to be addressed. Here, needs for counseling were taken as axiomatic, and it is quite pointless to continue debating whether youth should receive sex education. For this too was axiomatic and inevitable, with only the particular channels of this education being open to rational discussion. In a similar vein, a later publication of the Centers for Disease Control declared that the marital status of the mother confers neither risk nor protection to the infant. Rather, the principal benefits of marriage to infant survival are economic and social support. This rationalistic picture overlooked what is so often overlooked, that different kinds of people have different values and behavior patterns, and that these values and behaviors have enormous impacts on outcomes. But to say this would be to get into the forbidden realm of personal responsibility, and away from the vision of a benighted society needing to be reformed by the anointed, who reject consensus romanticism about the family, as it was put by Hillary Rodham, later Clinton.